What is your name, what are your pronouns, and what are you going to talk about today?
So I'm Hayley Picard-Dumas, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm here to talk about my biracial family.
Could you give us a biracial family 101?
Biracial family is when two heritage cultures, two races come together and have children, whether that be adopted children, whether that be or biological children. It would be two races coming together and having a family. Or without children. We would still be a biracial family without our two beautiful children.
Could you please give us a brief description of what having a biracial family means to you personally?
I think I recognise barriers for my children specifically. So when I met my husband, it wasn't a concern to me in any way, shape or form that I was falling in love with somebody who was black. I didn't think, oh, what are other people going to think, or what my family going to think. I think that's testament to how I was raised. My dad worked all over the world. I was exposed to so many wonderful cultures, which was an absolute gift actually. So I didn't see it would ever be any issue with it. It was my husband who was more concerned, and not because he was marrying somebody who was white. It was more about, what are your friends or what are your family going to think? You know, do you have any brown friends or black friends or family? So my children are dual heritage, biracial, mixed race, whatever terminology. And again, this is an individual thing. So however you refer to yourself, you identify, that's absolutely your decision. That's the terminology that we use. So my children are both daughters, 117, 112, and they're very fair skinned, which they hate me for. In all honesty, they're like, why did we not end up like dad? Why did we end up, my youngest daughter, she's got dark patches and light patches on her body, and when she was little, there was a real clear defined line sort of down the middle of her stomach, and she used to pull a t-shirt up, tell everybody, pull a t-shirt up and go, that's daddy, that's mummy. and you know, through the innocence of children. So I think my children are fair, but one of them's got afro hair, the other one's got long curly hair. They went through school thinking that their family was just their family, and it was never really until people pointed it out to them. So if granddad came to sports day, that's not your granddad. He's a different colour to you. But again, my children were just brought up in an environment where we just need to tell people, we just need to explain, and they'll know better for next time. That's the type of conversations that we had. I think my children are well-rounded, whilst they are more surrounded by white people because of where we live, because I'm super close to my mum. While I love my in-laws, I'm super close to my mum, so we tend to spend more time with my mum. We live closer to my mum, so the white culture is something that I think they have more exposure to. That said, and I'm making an assumption on behalf of my children, but it's not they don't deny either culture at all, or either race, or they just see themselves as themselves.
Have you felt you've been marginalised or stereotyped due to you having a mixed race family?
There's two parts to this story. So when I used to fly for Virgin, I would take my husband with me, and at the time he could get a standby ticket, but it cost him nothing. £60 it cost him to fly, most often than not in first class, in a bed with pyjamas, sat at the bar. You know, he was living his best life. But so all of that, absolutely fabulous, until we got to the destination. And if you've ever seen cabin crew in an airport, cabin crew go through a different sort of security system to you. But obviously my husband was a passenger on the aircraft, so would go through security his way. And every time he got stopped, and I mean every time, he still does get stopped when we travel as a family. But because he was alone, as far as the manifest is concerned, he's not traveling with me, he's traveling on his own. And he was like, yeah, it just happens. Like, but to me, I was like, that's my husband, let him through. So profiling became apparent in my life then. And then when I worked in counter-terrorism, I learned more about the profiling, which led me to want to be in EDI more than anything. There's that intersectionality as well. So I appreciate that in a lot of elements of society, people of colour are marginalised or underrepresented in lots of different areas of society, and also females are, and that's fact. So having that sort of intersectionality it does concern me.
Have you felt quite accepted within the university?
Until you know me, you don't necessarily know that I've got a biracial family. I'm very proud of my beautiful children and my husband that I adore. Because of the role that I do, I know that race has a part to play in stereotypes, in myths and things like that, because of the role that I do and because of the lived experience of my husband being the only black kid in an all-white school and in a small area of South Yorkshire. You know, there's all sorts of different that I know goes on. I don't think nobody knows that about me unless we're in this type of conversation, or I'm being friendly with you and I'm telling you about my lived experience, or I think if I share my lived experience, you'll be more likely to share your lived experience, then we learn more about each other, then we can be more accommodating to each other's needs, all of that sort of stuff. So these types of things, human library, absolutely fabulous, and I think they will help people share their lived experience. But that said, if you just met me, you wouldn't know. So yes, the university's been accommodating of me and my invisible differences, I would suggest, because I am a white person. Though sometimes, and this is me speaking from my own lived experience, because I champion race quite heavily, because of my lived experience and because of my family and my children, and because it's the right thing to do, but I am white, so I'm an ally. I'm not living literally in the shoes of somebody who's experienced certain things. So I will always speak from an ally, and sometimes in some rooms that isn't enough. You can't speak for me or with me because you are white and your experience is the white experience, which me being in a situation in policing when my internal Black Police Association wouldn't let me be involved because I was white. But the National Black Police Association welcomed my perspective and my allyship because of the role that I do, because of my family and everything like that. So I think the university needs to champion allyship a little bit more, explain allyship a little bit more, but also whilst remaining sensitive to people who actually do have those lived experiences as well.
Could you do some myth busting about stereotypes surrounding having a biracial family?
Your baby's definitely going to be black. It's definitely going to have afro hair. Now, one of my children has afro hair. One of them has very long, loose, curly hair that straightens very easily. One of them, like I say, has very brittle afro hair that breaks and causes her a lot of trauma and upset, and that is it's a whole thing in our house, and I feel for her because that's the thing, I don't have that lived experience, and as much as a mum you want to be there and you want to support. I am Google Queen when it comes to afro hair. I've taken her all over the place to try and support her in her hair journey, and it makes you feel really, really helpless in a lot of ways. So yeah, you're definitely going to have a black child, or stick to your own race. What's wrong with white people? What's wrong with black people? People are going to stare. Some people do, some people don't. It's individual, isn't it? I think, so the experiences of my mother-in-law and my father-in-law will have been very different because times change and people are more, and I hate this way of describing it, but it is with regards to this particular subject, because I don't want to be tolerated I don't want my husband to be tolerated. I don't want our family to be tolerated. I want my family to be understood. I want my family to be respected in their own right, and that goes for any sort of marginalised group, I would suggest. I suppose, again, educating yourself around the culture. So when I met my husband, he was brought into my culture and I was brought into his. And if you are going to be in a relationship with somebody or have any form of friendship with somebody, you want to have an understanding or an appreciation of what they like. You don't have to have exactly the same likes and dislikes, do you, to be appreciative of each other.
How can the people around you and the university do better?
Things like this is a massive it will make an impact, I believe, because you look at your privilege, and this addresses people's privilege, your privilege of not having to live in the space of somebody else. That is huge. And this helps you to see and recognise your own privilege. I check my privilege consistently because I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't, and I wouldn't be contributing to all of this as a person. So I think we all need to take responsibility for our own privilege, not see it as though it's a bad thing. Your privilege is not necessarily a bad thing, and you can have privilege but be marginalised at the same time. So I recognise that I have power privilege in this institution because of the level that I'm at in the institution, but I also recognise that females in leadership roles are fewer than males in leadership roles. Therefore, that part of my identity is technically marginalised. It's about understanding all of that, and the Human Library will definitely do work towards doing that. But again, there's more work to do, I think, around inclusive leadership. There's more work to do around equality, diversity and inclusion in research, becoming a global campus, which is not only reflected in the staff but in the student body. The institution is a lovely institution. If it wasn't, I wouldn't work here, and they're doing so much fantastic work, but there's always room for improvement, and I think we know the areas in which we need to improve on, or we're starting to understand that. And feedback is a gift, 360 feedback, speaking to our students, speaking to our staff, providing channels, vehicles of communication so that they can get feedback. The list is long and it's never ending, but until EDI becomes, I don't want to be here in 5 years' time. I want them not to need an EDI lead, and I want the institution not to need an EDI team, because it's become part of the DNA, the golden thread of an institution. So strategy is not just a strategy, it's actually how we are. So I try and do myself out of the job, really. That's utopia for me.
How do you feel the media represents biracial families?
This is a difficult one because it can become tokenistic to a certain extent. So we were watching, it was an advert that came on the other day, and it was literally a mum, a white mum and a white child, and a black mum and a black child, and they'd gone out for dinner or so. I cannot remember for the life of me what it was advertising, but it was an advert. My husband was sat on the sofa, and my husband went, "How do you feel about this advert?" And I said, you see, I understand the rationale around it about representation and what you see in the media on TV needs to reflect society, but it needs to be done in an authentic way. And when it's not authentic, it's like a neon light saying tokenism. This is tokenism. It's a fine line to get that right. I think in the 80s, again, biracial families were narrated in a way that, why are you mixing? You know, why stick to your own race, that type of thing. But now, I don't know whether I see it through a lens of just, I don't care what you think about me and my family. I don't think it's negative, but maybe that's me seeing it through my lens and just putting that positive spin on it because it's my life and my kids and my family. I would say the media, the way it narrates black men is not often positive. So the black man doesn't stay in the relationship, it's absent fathers and stuff. So that is a narrative that the media and soaps and TV shows and documentaries will project onto families. So I wouldn't say necessarily negative on biracial families. I wouldn't say necessarily positive on biracial families. It's maybe just not I've not really seen it. I really like Grey's Anatomy for things to do with race and gender identity, and all of the EDI. They seem to highlight them in a real authentic way that you think you can imagine. Obviously some of the storylines are a bit when there's a plane crash or there are some dramatizations in there that you're not going to go, oh, I'm going to get all my history lessons from or all my knowledge from Grey's Anatomy. You're just not. But there are, from a media and from a film TV perspective, Shonda Rhimes does quite well in her productions. She tends to tackle sometimes controversial topics, but also things that are being highlighted in the media, sometimes before it gets started to be highlighted in the media, and think, oh, you thought that first, Yeah, I think some people do it really well, and some people just avoid the subject because they don't want to. They don't know how to tell that story sensitively. What's that going to do to our brand if we get it wrong, and all of that sort of stuff.
Is there anything else you would like to say, or anything else you would like anyone to know about having a biracial family?
Just don't make assumptions about anything. And if you want to ask questions, ask them sensitively. Don't go, why is your child white? Or, are you sure that's the dad? And, all sorts of different stereotypes. Yeah, just be kind and be sensitive about asking questions, and then respect people's answers, because that's their lived experience. That's their perspective. So not yours. So you can't take it. It's not yours. So yeah, that's it really.